Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to invite anybody who's standing to come fill up the seats up front. That would be you, Jen. Come on in. That's what you get for coming in late. There you go. Welcome to the Metropolitan Planning Council's Roundtable on Bus Rapid Transit. I'm Peter Scozzi, Executive Vice President here at MPC. This roundtable is part of a series of roundtables that MPC conducts throughout the year. These roundtables are designed to talk about some of the policy issues that we're working on at the council and to advance some of the debate about them. Many of you have, a quick show of hands if you've been to a roundtable on bus rapid transit at MPC before. Great. So you know, you know what you're doing here. What's a little unique about this one, and what's very interesting, I think, about the bus rapid transit topic, is that MPC sort of has followed this topic all the way from birth to development, so to speak. In the initial phases, a lot of our work on BRT was around advocating for the concept, championing BRT as a low-cost, high-efficiency way to move people. There were several opportunities to advance that concept through Olympic bids or parking meter revenues. But more recently, federal grants and a willing mayor and a willing DOT commissioner and a willing CTA president have really been what's needed to take this project forward. And now we actually see bus rapid transit coming to the Central Loop next year, or in 2015, coming to Ashland Avenue shortly. We'll talk a little bit about that today. And what we're really going to focus on today, though, is, all right, it's a given, bus rapid transit's coming to Chicago. How do we take great advantage of that and move it forward, move the topic forward? And another quick show of hands. Everyone's heard of transit-oriented development? So the concept of using bus rapid transit to spur some of the same development that we see around train stations is really what today is about, and how do we capitalize on that opportunity? So we're going to have a whole new transit line cutting through the center of Chicago. How do we plan for that? How do we do land use around that? How do we attract developers and whatnot to that opportunity? So that's what today is about. I first want to turn the microphone over and the podium over to our friends at Friedman Seating. Come on up, Stan. Stan Bresniak is with Friedman Seating. They are the largest bus seat manufacturer in the region. Mull on that for a moment. And Stan's going to tell you a little bit more about Friedman. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Stan Bresniak, and I work in sales at Friedman Seating Company. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. As a sponsor of today's event, I just want to say that Friedman Seating is proud to support MPC in their work on transportation issues, so it's great to see everyone here and so many that are interested in Chicago's bus rapid transit programs. Quick history of Friedman Seating Company. It was founded in 1892 by Hyman Friedman, who manufactured seat cushions for horse-drawn buggies. Hyman had developed a great skill in upholstery, and during the Columbian Exposition of 1892, he was awarded a diploma of honorable mention in upholstery. Over 100 years later, and still under family ownership, Friedman Seating continues to supply the transit markets with seating solutions. Currently, we have over 600 employees at our facility in the 4500 block of West Augusta Boulevard in Chicago. We are vertically integrating and utilize multiple manufacturing processes such as cutting and sewing of many different fabrics, metal fabrications, welding, and final assembly. In addition to our manufacturing staff, we have many office personnel which support the transit market with engineering, sales, and our class-leading customer service. Primary markets that we serve are bus, rail, truck, specialty, and commercial vehicle seating. Friedman supplies seats to all major bus OEMs, in which turn supplies buses to the mass transit markets such as Chicago Transit Authority, New York City Transit, Los Angeles County Metro Transit Authority, as well as many other mass transit markets. Currently within the CTA, we have 58 articulated buses that have our seat products and are in the process to begin supplying seats for the next CTA bus contract for over 300 buses. We are excited to be part of the next generation of transit to improve the commutes of Chicagoans. By modernizing our rail and bus fleets, we are providing our passengers with a more comfortable, safe, and reliable transit system while making critical improvements that boost the economy with new jobs. In addition to connecting residents with greater employment opportunities, Friedman Seating is also committed to two of the mayor's economic development initiatives. The company is continuing its longstanding relationship with the city colleges by becoming part of the College to Careers program. Friedman Seating is also working with the Mayor's Office to support Skills for Chicagoland's Future, a key initiative that seeks to ensure the city's unemployed are hired for available positions by working directly with Chicago employers. As a Chicago company which has been around for over 100 years, we rely on the local workforce, and the city's public transit system personally affects many of our employees, past, present, and future. Today, our panelists will explore how other cities have invested in transportation options to both improve neighborhoods and residents' access to employment, and what Chicago can learn from these examples. I look forward to hearing about these solutions and know that you all do as well. With that, let me introduce back to Peter here, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Stan. Also interesting to note that Friedman provides the seatings for UPS trucks, and I learned Frito-Lay trucks, so, just thank your Frito delivery driver next time you see him for buying a Friedman seat. There I am. I mentioned already the development of BRT on Ashland Avenue. Later in October, probably in the early part of October, the CTA will be holding another series of public meetings on the preferred alternative. Important to note that, as we were deliberating bus rapid transit in Chicago, there was discussion about where the buses should actually run. Do they run in the median, along the curbside? How do we deal with parking? A whole host of issues. I'm really proud to say that this is a rendering of what the final design, at least at this stage moving forward, is going to look like. So the city has chosen to run bus rapid transit in the median, in the center lanes, which we know is a much more efficient way, produces much better results for the transit system, and simultaneously is going to preserve all that curbside parking that a lot of the merchants and local residents want to see as well. So we're going to get really a win-win with community development opportunities and a much higher efficient transit. I also want to just highlight really briefly some recent efforts by the City of Chicago to support transit-oriented development. The TOD ordinance by the City of Chicago passed the zoning committee last week. I believe it's being considered as we speak, or maybe as we spoke just recently, in City Council today. I presume it's going to pass. If anybody has a tweet on that and knows that it's passed, let me know. We'll make an announcement. But essentially what the TOD ordinance does, we've got a little graphic depiction here. Within 600 feet of a CTA or Metro Rail, there's density bonuses for B, C, and D in the -3 districts, so you can get an uptick in your floor area ratio. You can build more building. And you can reduce the amount of parking that you're required to provide. Both good attributes for solid transit-oriented development. At the moment, the ordinance doesn't have a provision for bus rapid transit, but I can assure you that at least MPC will be pushing for that when BRT is introduced and actually on the ground in Chicago. I don't think there'll be a lot of pushback from the City Council on that front, but until we have an actual BRT station in Chicago, it seemed odd to have the ordinance reflect that. But that's really positive news, and that's positive progress in the city for how we can support some transit-oriented development. I want to also just quickly brief you on a new tool that the Metropolitan Planning Council has been working on over the last year. As I mentioned, we've been talking about bus rapid transit now for the last several years, many of you coming to past roundtables on the topic. And now we're looking again at how we can bring this development opportunity to the fore, how we can make people aware of it and illustrate it in the best way possible. So, whoops. So what we've actually created is a sort of online tool to look at future bus rapid transit stations in the city of Chicago. What you see running down the center of the screen here is the Ashland corridor, and the blue highlighted section in the middle is the phase 1 of bus rapid transit development on Ashland. What this tool allows developers and community residents and aldermen and others interested in development around BRT stations to do, you can zoom into a station, let's just say, for example, the Chicago station, and you can actually see what the current zoning is around that station. It'll give you, pops up on the map, you can click within the different zones and it tells you specifically what it is. You can click on TIF districts and special service areas and find out what kind of tools are available and find out that this is the Westtown SSA, when it was active or when it was initiated. And you can look at an interesting calculation that we've tried to create here on floor area ratio, which if it was working, you could click on this little, there we go, floor area ratio. And what we tried to do here with this calculation is look at what the existing square footage of a building is and what the underlying zoning allows. So what you have here, in essence, is development potential, where the darker purple shades reveal higher development potential. There's maybe a mini mall or something, and there's a possibility to do something much greater, much more dense there. And so all we're trying to do with all this information is direct people's eyes and developers' interests towards these opportunities. We recognize that nobody's going to take all this information and then go out and try and develop a building, but at least we can start to focus the attention along this corridor and get people thinking about the opportunities that this creates. And then recently, we just added this layer with the TOD ordinance to show where the TOD ordinance would apply within transit stations and potential BRT stations in the city. So this is now available on our website. It will be linked live as soon as this presentation, as soon as this roundtable is over. And we're going to be pushing this out to community groups and talking to aldermen and talking to a lot of the developers in Chicago about it. Again, want to get this information out there so that folks are aware of it. You are the first to see it, though, previewed here today. Okay, enough about us and MPC. I'm going to invite, is Annie going to kick us off? So I'm going to invite Annie Weinstock up to the podium first. Annie and Walter are both with ITDP, the Institute for Transportation Development Policy, who's been working on bus rapid transit development really around the world. And also going to talk about a new report that they've got released on the development potentials of BRT. Come on up, Annie. First met ITDP a few years ago. I remember when they called us up on the phone and they said, hey, you guys are doing some stuff around BRT in Chicago, and we're interested in talking to you and finding out your story. Little did we know that they were really going to be part of our lives for the next 3 years since then, but it's been a wonderful partnership, and we're glad to have them in the city, too. Thanks. Annie?
Yep.
So you can just click, and your slides are up next.
Okay. Well, thanks, Peter, and thanks, MPC, for hosting this. Thanks, everyone, for coming. So I'm going to talk about a report that we are just about to release called More Development for Your Transit Dollar. It's an analysis of the development impacts of 21 BRT, LRT, and streetcar corridors around the U.S. and one city in Canada. We did this study because there had been a lot of experience in the U.S. around the development impacts of light rail, and not so much around the development impacts of BRT. And BRT is becoming a lot bigger in the US now. So, and internationally, in places like Curitiba, Brazil, where the first BRT was built in the 1970s, there has been a lot of experience with development around transit, so around BRT. So in Curitiba, the development you can actually see is directly aligned with the BRT corridor. So it was really well coordinated with the BRT development. And, but yet in the U.S., because BRT is fairly new, we don't have a lot of experience yet with how much, what kind of development impacts are possible until now. The other thing is that in the U.S., there have been a lot of projects which have been labeled as BRT, but which aren't necessarily BRT. So they might have one or two characteristics of BRT, but they're really just enhanced bus projects, and this doesn't give developers a lot of confidence to develop around them. So there's been a little bit of confusion in the past. About 3 years ago, ITDP and a team of international experts on BRT developed what's known as the BRT Standard. This is a scoring system which allows us to score existing and planned BRTs against international best practice. And what this gives us is a way to certify a project as gold, silver, or bronze. A gold standard project is in line with the best BRT systems internationally, some like Bogotá's Transmilenio. But it also gives us the ability to say what projects are not BRT, which don't meet the BRT basics. So this gives us a way of saying whether a project is or isn't BRT. In the U.S. now, over the last decade especially, there's been a lot of development on BRT. There are 7 corridors which are actually meet the minimum definition of BRT. They're true BRT corridors. The best scoring one we have is the Cleveland Health Line. That scores silver. We have 4 bronze BRTs in Pittsburgh, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, and Eugene, Oregon. And then we have 2 that are considered basic BRT, and those are also in Pittsburgh. There's no gold standard BRT in the US yet, but if we continue on the current trajectory with the Ashland development, Ashland could be the first gold in the US. So we scored all of the BRT corridors that we visited, and actually a lot of other ones in the US. And we also used the BRT standard to score light rail corridors in the US, because actually light rail and BRT have a lot of the same elements. So they're basically designed in a pretty similar way. They're just that light rail is on rail and BRT is not. So we scored all of the corridors that we visited, and we found that in the US there are 2 corridors that score as silver. One, again, is the Cleveland Health Line, and the other is the Portland Max Blue Line Light Rail. We had a handful of corridors which scored below basic, and so those are the streetcar and the enhanced bus projects. And then everything in between, we had some bronze corridors and a couple basic corridors. And then we collected data about the total TOD investments around each of these corridors. And what we found was that Portland and Cleveland were both able to leverage $6.6 and $5.8 billion of development respectively. And so those were the 2 highest leveraging corridors. And then we had everything down to little or no development. So the first conclusion we're able to draw here is that actually BRT is able to leverage development. This is one of the first times we actually have enough data now to say that definitively. And it can leverage a lot of development. So 3 out of the 6 corridors stimulated more than $1 billion of development. And one of them, Pittsburgh East Busway, is pretty close. So we wanted to explain the variance in all of this impact. So we looked at 6 different factors, 3 of them quality of transit, so that's the score using the BRT standard, the strength of the land market through which the corridor runs, the level of government support that was given to the corridor to help it to develop, then the age of the system length, and the system ridership. So I'm going to focus on the first 3 because what we found was that there was a lot less of a correlation between the last 3 in terms of explaining the variance. So I already talked about the quality of the transit corridor. The land market typology, we developed the land market typology to explain the strength of the land market through which the corridor runs. So we used a pretty simple typology. It's the same one that the Center for Transit-Oriented Development uses, basically limited, emerging, and strong, to explain how the strength of the land market for development. A corridor with limited development potential is extremely difficult to develop. There's a lot of reasons why it might be classified as limited. It might have really difficult topography. It might have contaminated sites that are expensive to clean up. It might be divided into a lot of small parcels that are hard to assemble. It might be extremely blighted. A corridor with emerging potential would have some blight, but would also be adjacent to some kind of economic anchor. So it has, with some government support, it has the potential to develop. And then a corridor with strong development potential is usually right in a downtown where there's potential for infill development. Maybe it's on a waterfront, or it has other natural features. And maybe there's historical buildings that are easy to redevelop. So then we also classified each of the corridors based on how much government support was given to them. So, and what we found was that the corridors with the strongest government support had the best TOD impacts overall. There was almost a direct relationship. So Portland, Cleveland, who had the highest TOD impacts, had the strongest government support. And by government support, I mean things like zoning changes, tax credits, financing and financial incentives, public amenities, infrastructure that goes beyond just the BRT, parks, and things like that. So 3 main conclusions. The first conclusion is that both BRT and LRT can leverage many times more TOD investment than they cost. And so now we can say that for sure. Second, per dollar of transit investment and under similar conditions, BRT can leverage more TOD investment than light rail or streetcars. So to give you an example, Cleveland per dollar invested into the health line leveraged $114 of development. Portland, on their Blue Line LRT, who had $6.6 billion overall, leveraged $3.74 per dollar invested into their light rail. So that means that Cleveland was able to leverage about 31 times more than Portland. And then there were three main predictors of success. In order, government support is the most important predictor. So if you have really strong government support, you're most likely going to have really good development impacts. Second, the land market strength. If you're putting your corridor in a really good place, then it's the second predictor of success. And then third is the quality of the transit. So what this says is that in a really strong land market, strong government support still gives you the greatest impact. The quality of transit is less important in these cases. So we've seen cases where streetcars or enhanced bus projects have been enough to leverage development. But we have to realize then that we're missing the main point of transit. The main point of transit is to provide a transportation benefit, and that transportation benefit is going to serve all of the people who are going to be coming to these new areas. So you would still want to build a higher quality transit. And then in emerging land markets, strong government support is also critical, but here is where we see a difference in a higher quality of transit leveraging more development. So we saw that in Cleveland and Portland both, where they built Silver Standard projects. And now I'm going to turn it over to Walter Hook, our CEO, to talk about some of the specific government interventions that can be done.
Thanks. So we tried to cull from all the very detailed interviews we did with a lot of the cities. And we said, well, what are the main lessons learned? Well, one was pick the right corridor to begin with. And that corridor should first and foremost serve a transportation need. So where do you have the most passengers? That's really the most important thing. But then if you want to use your transit investment to leverage transit-oriented development, you could maybe pick one corridor, and that corridor should be through land that is ripe for development. And secondly, it should be consistent with the city's strategic development plans. So it's actually quite hard to get a city to be that coordinated so that its land development plans are coordinated with its transit investments. But that coordination turns out to be critical to success. And then the other real lesson learned is most of your governmental effort is going to be landing those initial large-scale investors that are going to say, okay, Disney agrees to come into Times Square, therefore all the other developers are going to come. So I'm going to talk a little bit about then the Cleveland case study, because Cleveland turned out to be sort of the poster child, and maybe you already all know this story, but Cleveland's Euclid Avenue Health Line connected the two most economically productive anchors of the city, downtown and University Circle, where there was a concentration of cultural institutions and hospitals and universities, and the land between it was quite blighted. And so the idea of the city was to redevelop particularly the land in between the two anchors. They branded it as the Health Tech Corridor, and they intervened in a marketing perspective, but they also did a lot of other things. So when they built the Silver Line, they didn't just build the transit system, they also invested $150 million to bury the power lines, to fix the sewer and water system, to building wall to building wall, new sidewalks and street furniture and bike lanes, et cetera. All of these additional investments into that corridor reassured the developer community that they're going to have nice water systems, nice power systems. They also input fiber optic cable in that corridor. So it really isn't a story only about the transit investment. They then changed the zoning to state-of-the-art transit-oriented development type of zoning, which was mixed use, that required the developer to build to the street line. They were required to build out 80% of the lot width, so there weren't gaps in the urban fabric. They required a minimum of 3 floors, so that added densification. They required ground level retail, and they changed the parking regulation from a minimum to a maximum, and they cut that number in half. Now, which is very progressive zoning for this country. By European standards, it's fairly retrograde. But in any case, the first investor they landed was Geis. And Geis was a suburban developer, and most of his work was done out on these kind of ring road, office park types of development. So convincing Geis to move into this economically blighted neighborhood in downtown Cleveland was a huge thing, because they all knew if Geis would come, then the other developers would come as well, and the development would go. So government had to come in and give loans where they didn't have to be repaid if the developer didn't earn a return on their investment. About 40% of the financing was this kind of ultra-soft government loans from various sources. And they had to make a fair number of concessions in terms of their urban design criteria. You can see they got the parking moved to the back of the building. It does create a street wall, but they did not get the ground level retail, because at that time, the demand for ground level retail in this corridor was very, very limited. They only got 2 stories, et cetera. So what they ended up with was a zoning code that required this. They then had to go into a negotiation to land this developer. They had to put the financing together. They had to give some ground on what they wanted. But they landed that developer. That developer then came in and convinced a lot of other developers to come in. And now they're able to actually enforce the full zoning package that they wanted. And now the corridor has leveraged $5.8 billion in new development. There was a big package of government supports that went and made this happen. I've just listed the ones that we know happened, but this is very heavy government intervention, very focused by the planning department of the city government and the economic development department of the city government, really focus all their energy on the Health Line Euclid Avenue corridor. So almost all the new development in Cleveland happened on this corridor. So concentrating the city's attention and effort is absolutely critical. There was a big debate about affordable housing and whether it belonged in this corridor. There's already a lot of affordable housing in Cleveland. They did build some. So ITDP took some of these lessons learned here and internationally, and we created, similar to our BRT standard, a transit-oriented development standard, which is essentially an urban design-oriented tool. If you do these things, you'll get a much lower car mode share. There's already the LEED neighborhood development standard, which is too complicated and not usable outside the U.S. So this is a little bit of a simpler tool, which we also just released, and I think we may have copies floating around someplace. It just takes these simple, basic 8 principles that it then breaks down into metrics, which you can take a project and apply this and give it a score, sort of the way we do with the BRT standard. And this could be used by a city government as a kind of performance-based zoning code for a station area. So we're just sort of piloting this, and we'd like to cooperate with you guys on this. And, it has the sort of basic elements. I think I'm out of time, so I probably don't need to go into all the details. But in any case, active storefronts is a lot of what we're giving you extra points for. Being able to get in and out of the buildings, that's part of making the walking environment great. Cycling infrastructure on the corridor, also you get some points for. Bike parking at your stations. That's something we should probably be thinking about along Ashland, is bike parking. Bike sharing at the stations is another thing that came in, get a couple points for that. Small block sizes and permeable blocks for pedestrians turn out to be really important. This is a really cool development in Beijing where you can kind of walk through all the buildings in public space, so your walking distances are very much shortened. This is Malmö in Sweden, where they've developed these very small block sizes, which make it allows you to walk a very short distance. So connecting these blocks, developed primarily around transit, a lot of points for just nearness to the nearest mass transit station. This is the Guangzhou BRT system that we designed. That's why I was happy to show this picture. Mixed use, obviously. You can have mixed use on multiple levels. This is a cool development in Guangzhou with ground level retail, retrofitting an old socialist era public housing type of project. You see these coming in. Densification around the mass transit system. You've got that nice TOD ordinance now. It would be great to apply it. The 3.5 FAR is a little low by international standards, but in any case, it's the right direction. Compact, meaning that the development is in an urban brownfield surrounded by existing development rather than out on the city's periphery. You get some extra points. And finally, shift. So parking is really the big battle. You know, I mean, it's great that you have reduced your parking minimums, but parking minimums, let's face it, are really yesterday. Most people now have parking maximums, or they're using zone-based parking caps to regulate traffic. But you can see what that does to the urban fabric. So you get a huge amount of extra points in the TOD standard for having a very minimal parking footprint. So Ashland, you know, it looks great on a lot of these things. It's an emerging corridor. It's an emerging land market. We're going to have really high quality transit. But really critical is going to be to get the Chicago authorities to really decide if that's where they want to focus their attention. There is a big zone right in the middle there that is one of Rahm Emanuel's neighborhoods that he wants to prioritize on. So we're very hopeful we'll have like a gold standard BRT with the gold standard TOD right next to it. And I think with partners like MPC, we have a great shot. Thanks very much.
Thank you all. It's a terrific segue into our next speaker, but just wanted to point out a couple of things about ITDP's presentation. You've got another first, the BRT report that they put out, and there's copies available of that in your chair. I think we put them out in the front. And then the other point to stress, too, that we are on the path for gold. So everybody go, yay! We are on the path to gold. So we want to provide as much encouragement and support to those in the city who have to make some of the difficult decisions to keep us on that path as we can. So our next speaker is Melinda Pollock. Melinda is with Enterprise Community Partners and one of our new partners on creating some of that government and community support for TOD. So I'm going to let Melinda give her presentation first, and then we'll follow up with a few more details on our work moving forward into 2014. So you just click and go.
Okay. So again, I'm Melinda Pollock. I'm with Enterprise Community Partners. I don't know a lot about BRT, so I'll be brief. But Enterprise Community Partners is a national nonprofit organization. We have a presence here in Chicago, but we've been financing and creating supportive policy for the development of affordable housing and community facilities for over 30 years. We've helped to finance and or build over 300,000 affordable homes and supportive community facilities around the country in our time. And we've increasingly made our work about affordable and equitable transit-oriented development. And through the modest research that we do, we're really primarily practitioners. I think we've concluded many of the same things that Walter and Annie sort of presented to you at a high level and that they go into a lot of depth on in their report. We're just coming at it from a different angle. We're coming at it as community development practitioners who need that quality transit for our community development to be a success. But so many of the same, I think, themes are going to come through in my few minutes here. I have two colleagues who are here from our Chicago office, Andy Gear and Rosa Ortiz, and they're in the back, so wave your hands. If you've got questions for us afterwards, any of us are happy to talk with you about the work we're doing here in Chicago, because I'm not going to go into any detail on that today. We have a national transit-oriented development initiative where we're working to create communities of opportunity across the country, and we find that connecting housing plus transportation, as many of you do, is absolutely essential. We're pretty agnostic on the rail versus bus debate. We just know and understand that quality transit, one or the other, is absolutely essential. So I'm going to talk with you a little bit just about kind of at the big picture level, how we're thinking about these issues, and then share a couple of examples just from Denver and Seattle with you. So here's what we were asked to cover with you. How are we defining equitable TOD? What makes it work, both from a systems level perspective as well as a market force perspective, and what could it look like, and what seems to make sense in terms of next steps here in the Chicago region as we're partnering with many of you. So our understanding and definition of equitable TOD comes from work we've done this past year through support of Living Cities and in partnership with the Low Income Investment Fund. And we have a report that we released in the spring that looks like this, and it's available on our website, and I brought about 15 copies, so if you'd like it, it's called Filling the Financing Gap for Equitable Development Near Transit. You're welcome to grab a copy on your way out, or if we run out, give Andy or Rosa or myself your card, and we can either send you a link and or send you a hard copy, whatever you prefer. So to us, equitable TOD creates equal opportunities for people of all incomes, particularly low-income communities, by prioritizing affordable housing and community facilities near transit. It needs to provide transit-accessible services so that low and moderate-income families can truly live without their cars or without cars. And it needs to think about more than just buildings and transit. It needs to create walkable, pedestrian, bike-oriented communities so that people are living in a place. And we're finding that increasingly our partners on both the financing and development side strongly agree with that. Much like ITDB does in their report, we go in our report into a fairly lengthy discussion about who are the system of actors in a region that need to be bought in so that we have support, political will, the right programs and policies in place for transportation and corresponding development to thrive. And so this is our sort of operating list of the model system of actors. These actors need to be highly functional at both the system scale and at the project, the deal scale, in order for great things to happen, for great things that meet your gold standard to happen, right? So when we're looking, these are kind of vague notions, but when we're looking for a system that works, we're looking for one that has alignment. So these partners know how to work together. They have a track record of working together towards shared goals. They have enough capacity, so once they can identify those goals, they can actually carry forth those goals, and they have support, financial and otherwise, to make those goals happen, to see those goals through. So we know what we're looking for, but there is no perfect place. We are yet to find the perfect place. We know what we're looking for, but we know that everywhere we go, no place is perfect. No place has all of those factors in place. When you boil down and sort of say, so we're still working on creating these ideal systems. We know how to help move systems along to be stronger, better, higher capacity. When we start to look down at the deal level, we find, for the most part, places still focus on individual real estate projects. It's very hard to articulate, to take an articulated vision at a corridor level and actually sort of methodically implement real estate development. Even when you have intent to do that, you often don't have the right sort of corridor level or regional level plan in place. Funding, building capacity across silos is incredibly difficult. So you might, want to realize a library and a charter school and housing right next to each other, but bringing those right players with the right tools in place to make those things happen, really hard, happens sometimes. And we're still finding that sort of all of these great ideas around what systems level, corridor level, implementation of TOD, we're still really, when it comes down to financing, we're still tinkering at the margins of what innovation can be. So we've created a few innovative tools in the Bay Area and Denver. Those are front-end financing. We haven't changed the way we finance community development or any sort of development near transit. We're still using our same buckets of tools and resources that we were, and that's something we're working very hard to change over the next couple of years. Again, very similar to what I think you guys are saying as well. The way regions go about creating equitable development near transit are really vary. Some have more strengths and some have more weaknesses in each of these aspects, but we look across these aspects. So we look at strong, moderate, or weak economies. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that at both the regional scale and then the corridor scale and the deal-specific, project-specific scale. All places seem to have very highly variable levels of political will to implement equitable TOD around their already existing or soon-to-come transit. We agree, just I think as your report concludes, it is the biggest factor in whether or not we can get anything done in the places where we're working. How much government support there is the biggest factor. The nature of the transit system was sort of my language for what you called, I think, the quality of the transit, but we also look at how expansive is it growing, is it branded, all of those same factors. And then, again, this capacity within the local and state government. There may be political will at an elected level, but if it's not there at the staff level, it's hard to get anything done. So again, we look very much too at these market definitions. We also work with the Center for Transit-Oriented Development, and we slightly tweaked the terms with the Center for Transit-Oriented Development earlier this year, actually, when we were working in Los Angeles on a project for the Los Angeles for Metro, for the transit agency. We redefined them as warm, emerging, and cool, but same exact points here across these typologies. And so from a community developer's perspective, a practitioner's perspective, we look at, so what are the interventions? What are the things we want to go make happen in each of these market types that make sense, that make a real difference? So in the warm marketplaces, we're looking at affordable housing preservation. We're looking at mixed use, mixed income developments that a lot of people want to see when they think about TOD, but are often hard to make happen in weaker marketplaces. These are the pilot, shining example type of opportunities. They cost a lot to do in warm markets, and so you often can't do a lot of them. In emerging markets, this is where we tend to really focus in these places where the change is happening. I would argue some of the stops along the Denver Southwest line that you talk about have probably changed since you did your research. These are emerging marketplaces where we're investing a lot. The quality of the transit there really does matter. We totally agree with that. This is where we want to use our highly preferential TOD acquisition money. This is where we want to try to do mixed use, mixed income, but sometimes do affordable. And then there's cool markets. So these are often places where we need to advocate for and help support basic infrastructure improvement and last mile connections and affordable housing. So just to share 3 examples with you, and then I'll wrap up. I live in Denver, so I'm going to share 2 Denver examples where in Denver, 3 years ago, Enterprise and our partners created the Denver TOD Fund, which is a $15 million land acquisition fund with great rates and terms that allows sort of early stage financing for affordable housing and community facilities. So this is a project that through that fund is under construction right now. Oh, why can't you see one of my pictures? Oh, that's weird. I don't know. So one of my pictures came off, but that's okay. So you can see here that in the top right corner is our site map, and on the north end of the site is where our highest frequency bus line, the 16, the Colfax bus line, if you know Denver, runs east-west and always has. And just south of the apartments, 2 blocks south, is where we have a brand new rail line called the W line, the West line, that opened just in April of this year. So we invested in this site before the W opened. We certainly knew it was coming. It's certainly an amenity, but we would have done this deal with or without that W line because the 16 is, again, the highest used bus in the region. It's not BRT. I don't think it ever will be, but it has both a local and an express service. When the rail opened, it's interesting, they actually discontinued for a short period of time the express bus service, thinking that everyone would be using the rail. But because of where the rail terminates, it wasn't doing for people what it needed to do in terms of getting them across town. So we actually had to work with our organizing partners to get that express bus service reinstated. So just an interesting, potential case study to talk about sometime. But what we're doing here, we have a new public library under construction. We have 70 new apartments using low-income housing tax credits under construction. There's childcare facility going in here. There's nonprofit office space and a retail pad. It also there's an existing strip mall that surrounds it. This was a food desert. We have a new grocery store that opened in there last year. It's all doing extremely well. This is a much more modest example. This is an early acquisition that we made with the Denver TOD Fund 3 years ago. You can just see above and below, this is in Northeast Denver. It's just a 36-unit property that had been foreclosed. We used the TOD fund and neighborhood stabilization dollars to purchase the property, fix it up, get it reoccupied, add a playground. It's a neighborhood that's just a block off of a high-frequency bus line that runs from the east down into downtown. In 2016, it will have rail access, but again, that rail access was actually a pretty modest factor. The high level of bus use in this neighborhood was really what drove us to consider it TOD and to invest in it. And then last, I'll just share this one, which if you've been doing BRT lunches for years, I'm sure you've heard about this deal, but I just felt I'd share it with you too. So this is the Village at Overlake Station in Redmond, Washington. So this is a deal that was done 10 years ago. So if you're looking for deals with a track record, it's been open for a long time. It's been long successful. It was the King County, done but in partnership between a nonprofit developer, the King County Housing Authority. They use tax-exempt financing, federal housing tax credits. You can see it says like Redmond, Washington, bike capital of the universe, and that's probably true. But they now I think have an operating laundry that employs people from across the community in it. But this is one again where I think this is a community that, as Seattle expands its transit system, is going to have pretty good rail service in a couple of years. But it's long been dependent on high quality bus, and this is not the only bus-oriented development that King County and its housing authority have done. They have several really good examples. So I'm going to skip that one in the interest of time. So just sort of concluding thoughts on behalf of Enterprise in terms of the work we've been doing here with you in Chicago and kind of where we go from here as we move into discussion. In terms of where it seems to us the Chicago region is today, when you look at those questions of do you have alignment, do you have capacity, what's holding you back from moving quickly along Ashland and or other places, I think we see that there's a high level of alignment here across your regional and local actors. There's a high level of commitment and even improving that alignment over the next couple of years. We and IFF have been very active with our partners in the western and southern communities around implementation of Sustainable Communities Initiative grants that we think have laid a great framework for the kind of work that may be possible here in the next couple of years. In terms of capacity, I think what we're seeing is again extremely promising in terms of your local MPO, your city and surrounding cities, MPC, the fact that you have the Center for Neighborhood Technology on the ground here in Chicago. I mean, what many of us would give for that. You have so many unique partners and components of capacity that you can bring together. So I think the question, that we're facing right now is in such a large region, and we face this in our work in LA as well. How do we focus in? How do we prioritize without excluding the opportunity to do good work in good places over the next 5 to 10 years? And then how do we harness support for implementation, for development, for policy change, and sustain that? I think we see a lot of places kind of build momentum and then fall back. So those are the key questions we look forward to working with you on over the next couple of years. I'll stop there.
So we've got ample time as planned to turn the program over to you in the audience. And so think about some questions you might have for members of the panel. Just to put the pieces together again, though, what I think we've seen going on in Chicago over the last several years is the development of quality transit. So we've talked a lot about what the city is doing on Ashland Corridor for bringing some gold standard bus rapid transit to the city. And now, again, what we're talking about is how to really leverage that and take great advantage of it through ancillary TOD development, through equitable transit-oriented development, as Melinda coined it. And that's really what we see our next steps. This is a great slide. Next steps here in Chicago focusing on. With Enterprise, MPC is setting a table right now which has a number of government and community development partners at it, looking at solving these problems, at answering these questions. What are our next steps? Where can we strengthen the Chicago's recently passed TOD ordinance? What other legislative tools or ordinances are needed to support transit-oriented development? We do have terrific city departments that are working with us on this effort. So unlike many communities, we're not out there fighting for attention. We've actually got some very willing partners at the table. We also have some willing partners at the regional table. The Chicago Metropolitan Agencies for Planning has put TOD as a goal of the regional plan and also offers technical assistance to communities that want to pursue that. So again, how do we leverage all that and bring it together under a sort of cohesive and strategic strategy? That's going to be the game plan for the next several months. And then really how to start attracting capital to support that development and really bringing the financing in. Once there's a vision, once there's some clear goals set, and once we've set the table and brought the actors together, putting the money in place to make the deals actually occur. So I'm going to open the floor up for questions, ask you to raise your hand. We have a couple folks wandering with microphones, and please wait for the microphone to come. Just state your name clearly and a short question so that the folks who are watching online can get every word that you say. So, who's first? We have someone first in the back. Oh, Steve? Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. My name's Steve DeBretta with the Industrial Council of Near West Chicago. Ashland Avenue BRT is about 16 miles long, I think, and goes through many different kinds of neighborhoods. I'm curious if any of you have studied BRT's effect on industrial corridors.
The Cleveland Midtown area is a mostly former light industrial corridor. You'll notice when they compiled the money they needed to do that project, they used a lot of EPA brownfield cleanup money. So the removal of problems, for example, a lot of them were former gas stations or former light industrial facilities with oil tanks. And so you have specific risks when you're dealing with brownfields that you're trying to convert to something like residential or mixed use. So there is a lot of programs in the U.S. that like EPA runs around brownfield redevelopment. You have to bring those players to the table when you're dealing with a former industrial area. You might need to deal with zoning changes, et cetera. But yeah, I think Cleveland, it was formerly light industrial, it wasn't heavy industrial.
Just from a development perspective, I'd say, one of the things we're dealing with in Denver right now is as we continue to open new rail stations in industrial or partially industrial areas, we're trying to figure out how do we use the opportunity of the rail station and adding development to move what in some cases is really sort of dispersed residential closer to a rail station so that we can open up more opportunity for light industrial that is in a lot of these areas to retain and or grow. And we have a couple of particular neighborhoods right now that we're pretty in deep studying both with residents and business owners and employees. How do we help facilitate that happening? It's a pretty significant priority of a good portion of our city council as well. So I don't know that we'll do it as well as we hope to do it, but we certainly have a vision around it right now.
I'm going to help Steve and put a little bit finer point, Walter and Andy. If you've had experience, the Industrial Council is a very active corridor. The Industrial Council represents a very active industrial corridor. So I think the challenge of mixing BRT and its design features with some of the literally semi-trucks that need to access these facilities is a challenge. So are there models that we could look to for some lessons learned? And maybe there aren't. I'm not aware of any myself.
I mean, obviously, most BRTs are operating on, the most successful ones, at least internationally, are operating on urban arterials, and most of those urban arterials have to accommodate in one form or another trucking movements. And obviously, when we design a BRT system anywhere in the world, we're going to design it where we have ridership. And industrial workers are sometimes an important part of the transit system. So you have to figure out how you're going to accommodate those truck movements. Usually we probably we're probably going to encourage some alternative route for the heavy truck movements, because if you're trying to build BRT, we're usually trying to create more of an urban, a corridor with more urban characteristics where large truck movements aren't really that compatible with that kind of high pedestrian volumes. Bikers don't like big trucks. In Europe, they tend to regulate big trucks out of the central urban areas and require them to transfer, et cetera. So I mean, there's a lot of practice with regulating truck movements in urban areas, and you have to be careful to make sure you're accommodating the truck movements, but you might not necessarily want the heavy trucks on that kind of a corridor. You might be fine with the trucks on that kind of a corridor, depending on what you're doing.
Okay. So we've still got some work to do on that too here. Yes, in the back in the blue shirt. Yes, that's you. You're in the back from my perspective. Sorry.
Hi, I appreciate all your input from a I guess more or less a macro perspective on the issue, but from someone who actually lives and has to deal with the city every single day, I've kind of a boots on the ground question for you, and I hope that someone here is specifically grounded enough in the actual local situation to answer this. From what I've seen on the MPC website and a couple other websites, it looks like they're going to create one-lane traffic each way on Ashland with the bus median down the middle. And I don't know. There's a lot of situations in the city where you can't really, you need other than mass transit. You need cars in inclement weather. You need cars when you're shopping.
So your question's about the impact on cars?
Yeah, in terms of parking, in terms of delivery trucks, where are they going to drop the stuff off at the stores? And also, from what I've seen on the websites, are cars going to be able to make left turns on Ashland?
Good. So I'll take a stab at answering that question, and I won't put any of the folks in the audience on the spot who are probably better suited than I to answering that question, unless they want to be put on the spot. So there's been a lot of modeling done to look at the impacts of dedicating that lane of traffic for the buses. There's a couple of advantages, a couple of things that work to our advantage in Chicago. The chief among that is our grid system. So there's lots of alternative routes that cars can take. And in fact, the reduction in travel time speeds for cars on the corridor is around, somebody help me, 5%? 3 miles an hour? 1.3 mile per hour reduction. I'm not getting that from anybody in the audience. That just came to me. So that's one issue. So there's alternatives to that. In terms of the loading zones and such, that's a lot of the work that's taking place literally right now, going block by block through the corridor, seeing where some of those loading zones can be consolidated, where you can have designated loading zone spots for the stores, rather than having one for every store and 3 on a block, for example. And I think that's a relatively simple fix. It will still keep the parking on the side, so we'll have access to the retail stores, which is another big concern for a lot of the stores along those corridors. And as far as left turns go, yes, the initial vision is to try to restrict those or limit those as much as possible, because of course that does not only help to expedite the movement of the buses, it also helps to expedite the movement of the cars too, because there's less conflict in turning. But again, the analysis that's taking place right now is to go block by block and look through the corridor and see where some possible exceptions might need to be made to that rule. So right now at the stage we're at, the image you're seeing with the center running line on our website, that's the alternative that's moving forward, but there is still some detailed engineering work taking place over the next few months that may or may not revise that some. So I hope that answers your question a little bit, or you can pigeonhole somebody afterwards. Okay, any other questions? Yes, on the corner, on the edge here, please.
Yes, another boots on the ground, or rather boots on the bus type of question. I'm a reporter for a North Side newspaper, and perhaps a majority of our readers do use public transportation, because on the North Side you have a lot of congestion. Cars aren't always that practical as much as public transportation. Now, any estimates on how how much the Ashland route, which is the one we're talking about today, is going to cut travel time, let's say from Bryn Mawr down to the Loop. Any figures on this, or?
There are some figures on that, and I think perhaps even the handout at your chair has some of that information. I don't have there's a whole cheat sheet of some of these quick-to-reference facts that are available on the BRT Chicago website. So a lot of those stats have been calculated, increase in riderships, increase in travel time speeds. I don't have the specific number that you're looking for, though. I'm sorry. Okay. Just a second. We got one more here, and then we'll get over here.
Hi, I'm Amy Yee from Village Park, and we have a TOD development that has about 240 apartment condo units that are being built. And so we're right on the train line, and it's a great opportunity for development. The problem is I don't have bus service to my train station, so I was wondering if I could ask the panel what suggestions they might have for me.
How do you generate some transit where there is none?
I don't know if I understood. So you're next to a rail line, but you also need.
So I'm on the Metro line, so we have train
the
station.
Metro line,
So
okay.
we're on the Metro line, so commuters, we have about 1,000 commuters that go into the city every day, but no bus service to the train station. So we're trying to talk to the transit authority to get bus service established, because there's no bus service that links within the town, and trying to, so they want to do a survey, and a number of the large retailers have said it's a problem for them for securing employers or employees, because there are some employees that need to travel by transit and they can't get there.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've seen everything from grassroots responses to that challenge, where we've partnered with community organizers, again, to sort of to document from firsthand individuals that we find on the street, to door knocking at residences, to partnering with businesses and major multifamily apartment building owners to document for the transit agency the level of demand and ridership for that type of service and deliver to them. And we've seen results, positive results from that. And then we also we also have examples like in the Denver Tech Center, right, where we have a rail line that you get off the rail line and you're quite far for most people from their places of employment in this case, where there's been a private, market response where employers have banded together to provide, shuttle services for employees who would like to use the transit, but it's just not practical without a last mile connector.
I mean, one of the big benefits of bus rapid transit is that it reduces the operating costs on your existing bus system. So that then frees up some resources, because you don't need as many buses to serve the same travel demand, because they're all going a lot faster. So that allows the transit authority to have some more resources to deploy wherever they might best be redeployed to meet the community's needs.
Terrific. I think we had a question in the back in the corner. Steve?
So this is a question for Walter. So we've
And
already
introduce yourself, please.
I'm John Greenfield with Streets Blog. We've already seen a lot of opposition to the Ashland BRT plan from the CTA. I think it's really difficult for a lot of regular citizens to wrap their heads around why it would make sense to convert travel lanes from car lanes to bus lanes, and also to prohibit left turns. A lot of regular citizens just can't understand how that could be a good idea. And I'm just wondering if there have been similar situations in other towns that have implemented BRT. Was there strong opposition, and how was that dealt with? How were they able to continue with the projects?
I mean, yeah, every community grapples with a similar set of issues. In terms of dedicating a bus lane, I mean, that's usually not that heavy a lift, because if your buses are already going up and down that corridor, they tend to consume more or less a lane anyway, because they stop all the time. So somebody's trapped behind that bus one way or the other. If you put the buses, if you have a high enough frequency of buses and you give them a dedicated bus lane, you're probably moving about the same number of people that your mixed traffic lanes are, and you're probably not doing much to deteriorate the speed for the remaining traffic. So they're trying to design Ashland in a way that would try to keep the speeds for mixed traffic as high as possible with very little. It doesn't look too bad. It looks like it's going to be relatively limited deterioration of the mixed traffic speeds. We do want to get the bus demand up, get more buses into that corridor, and so we're talking with CTA about some additional services that would pull more demand and more frequency into that corridor. The issue with the left-hand turns is always comes up. It's just a misunderstanding of traffic engineering. I mean, in most cities on major arterials, they're forbidding left-hand turns without a BRT because it's simply a question of the speed of the people going straight relative to the speed of the time lost of the people that are turning. So if you don't have very many people turning, and yet you have to add a signal phase to accommodate that movement, it's not just delaying your busway, it's delaying everybody going straight. So you should run a cost-benefit analysis to see whether it makes sense. Now, obviously, if you've got a busway in the central median, the busway is going to have to stop the buses while the vehicles are turning left, whereas the straight-moving vehicles can continue. So you have an additional delay for your buses if you allow those left-turning movements. You also need the space to put the bus station in. If you've given it to a left-hand turning bay, you don't have the space anymore for the BRT system. So the removal of left-hand turns tends to be part and parcel of building a BRT system. Most of the time, what it does is most people go straight a little bit faster, and a few people turning left are inconvenienced. They're going to have to take an alternative couple of right turns to make that turn. Most cities we confront, they say, oh my God, you know, we don't have any grid. If we only had a street grid, we'd allow for left-hand turns. So we come to Chicago like, wow, you know, you've got this amazingly dense street grid. All you have to do is make 3 rights and you're done, you know? So, and it's very, very few people. So to us, like, Chicago is a paradise for banning left turns. And we're surprised that you haven't already banned them on the main arterials just to improve the traffic flow. You know, like San Francisco already on Geary, I think, or Van Ness, they already banned the left-hand turns before they implemented any BRTs because it improves the traffic's flow in a general way. We're seeing left-hand turning bans on major arterials happening without BRTs. So, but if there's a really high turning volume of left-hand turns in some very specific locations, you have to accommodate them.
We're also seeing, in terms of parking, we're starting to see some studies come out that show that if you remove parking in favor of, or on-street parking in favor of more pedestrian or transit-friendly environments, actually the businesses are doing better. So in Mexico City, they pedestrianized an entire street, and they did it, I think, at first once a week, and they checked with the businesses, how did you do? Because they were opposed. And then they did really well, and over a little bit of time, they were able to close the whole street. And now there's a new study in Seattle, which is similar, about bicycles, removal of parking because of bike lanes.
Coming up in the corner, we've got Jeff, and then we'll take this one next.
Hi, Jeff Shriver, CDOT. I have a question for Annie and Walter. And your study pointed out there's a very wide variety of factors that influence land development, and especially transit-oriented development, and what makes it transit-oriented, and I think that's really helpful. It also made an interesting calculation about the sort of return on investment or bang for the buck for sort of comparing BRT to LRT and the amount of capital expended, and that implies that there's some sort of methodology for gauging how much of that development impact is attributable to the fact that there's BRT or LRT present, and that always seems to be the challenge of doing these sorts of studies, is how do you attribute what share of that development occurred sort of because there's BRT or LRT. And I only say that, and not to be cynical, but like here in Chicago, we had a big LRT plan 20 years ago that could have been done 15 years ago. And in the past 15 years, we've had billions and billions of dollars of redevelopment all along the corridors where the LRT was supposed to go, but we didn't have the LRT. So that sort of implies that we got the best return on investment possible. We made no investment, yet we got all the benefit, right? So I was just wondering if you wanted to speak to how do you allocate that?
I don't think that we are attributing any of the developments 100% to the transit investments. It's part of the package of all of the support that's being given to the corridor. So it's possible that in a really strong corridor with a lot of government support and no transit, you might get a good amount of development. Probably if you added transit, you would do even better. But importantly, then in those situations, you still need transit in order to create that kind of dense urban environment. So we don't look at it as did the transit stimulate development. We look at it as it was a piece of everything else.
We tried to control for it a little bit by saying, well, if the land market was really, really strong, it's pretty hard to attribute the development that happened there specifically to the transit investment. Whereas if it's an emerging market, it's more clearly linked to the transit investment. So, for instance, we have these 2 streetcars and the Kansas City light bus corridor improvement, and they all look like they leveraged a huge amount of investment, so it comes out, they pop out as really high. And it's because they went through downtowns that were kind of redeveloping. So it's pretty hard to attribute that development to them. Whereas if it's going through an emerging land market, the way the Euclid Avenue corridor is really in some seriously blighted communities, there was nothing going on there. And then the development is emerging there. It's much easier to attribute it to the transit investment. And you can just geographically tell, oh, well, it's following the transit corridor. So we really did try to control for it using that issue of the inherent market, of the strength of the land market.
We might not have the LRT, Jeff, but we still did still have the loop. So that was a little...
Thanks. Ben Spees from the Industrial Council of Near West Chicago. Are your criteria for true BRT available somewhere, given the 7 examples that you shared?
Yeah, you could go to brtstandard.org. It's the whole BRT standard is there.
Good question. I thought I saw another hand on this side. Yes, in the front row, please.
Hello, Gordon Ziegenhagen with Draper and Kramer. Wondered a couple of questions. Wondered about first phase of Ashland BRT, when we would expect it to be finished. When we'd expect maybe some of these other extensions of Ashland, and then of the several other lines that were at least kind of discussed in a planning document year plus ago. How real are those? Are they dependent on the success of Ashland and any general timing for those other lines?
Sure. Do you guys want to cover the Ashland one real quick?
I guess it'd be more appropriate for somebody from CTA to answer those questions.
But I can tell you the Ashland corridor, the initial pilot phase should be up and running by 2015. So if all goes well accordingly. The other corridors that you saw perhaps are referring to the Route to Opportunity, the MPC report that we put out that looked at a potential 10-route network within the city of Chicago. Those were routes that were identified based on some of the issues we're talking about here today, is proximity to jobs, proximity to retail and other amenities that people are taking transit to, and also corridors upon which we could reduce some of the overall housing and transportation burden by providing that transit option. So that was our, again, attempt to continue to further and advance the debate around BRT. I will tell you right now, the City of Chicago, CDOT, and CTA are actually working on a city-sponsored system plan, which I think will draw heavily from some of that past work that we've done, but will it then put forth the city's vision for which routes come after Ashland. And so that's still a little bit to be determined, and we'll probably see the results of that, say, second quarter next year. So, Mr. Friedman.
Friedman Seating Company.
Microphone, please.
Thought I'd try to take it up a level here. And I know you've done projects worldwide. Do you see, from a political and approval process, a difference in appetite for these BRT projects here versus overseas? Can you get it done easier overseas?
It really depends where we're talking about. And so, I mean, I think there are some pretty long processes that we have to go through in the U.S. versus in a lot of the other countries we work in. So, you know, in certain places, I think Bogota was like 3 years or something, 3 years from the day they approved it to the day it was open, and that was really fast. In other places where we work, you know, it's one of the benefits we have here is extremely high capacity to do projects, whereas, you know, we work in other cities in Africa, for example, and just building the capacity could take years. So it really just depends.
I mean, definitely the problem in the United States is the procedural problems. The timing it takes to put the financing and to do the construction, to put the financing together and do the construction in the U.S. should bring the project timeline down to 2, 3, 4 years maximum. But, you know, and Chicago's doing a great job, like going about as fast as we've seen in the U.S. Internationally, yeah, you can build a BRT in 18 months. And in San Francisco is the worst we see in the U.S., where it seems like it takes forever and a day to, you know, do something they planned 10 years ago. I don't know why.
All right, we'll take one more quick question before we have to wrap up. How about from our president, Mary Sue Barrett?
Hi, Mary Sue Barrett, and thank you to everyone for coming today. It's fascinating to me to hear the panelists riff off of each other, because they may come from different areas of expertise, but arrive at similar conclusions and typologies. Melinda, I'm curious, because you saw an early demo of the asset mapping around the future bus rapid transit stations. And you know from Enterprise's work about the early funds in the south suburbs and the West Cook suburbs to support transit-oriented development. Chicago's got bigger potential scale-wise. What do you think we can do to align so that they move together, the bus rapid transit development and the development around the future transit? Do we have to wait for BRT service to be there, or how can we, you know, get potential investors to accelerate with us?
Yeah, I think you have to, you know, remember the market typologies that we've shared today, right? The emerging, the cool, and the warm, right? And that there's things you can do right now, right, in all three market types to create the right environment for the type of development you eventually want to see. It just may be that those things that you can do in each kind of market are a little bit different. One of the things, you know, we plan to do in partnership with you and others over the next couple of months is actually, you know, go from that understanding to a much deeper look at some of the actual neighborhoods and the land availability. I mean, you have a great virtual tool, but looking at the actual land availability, property availability, preservation opportunity, and start to aggregate, you know, at a project-specific opportunity level, rolling that up at a corridor level. What are the kinds of financing needs that exist? What are the barriers from both a financing and policy perspective? And what's the agenda we can aggressively pursue over the next couple of years to create, you know, both the pool of resources and the policy change that you need? I think, you know, we certainly find in other places that, you know, using the positive and sometimes even negative excitement around a new corridor, a new transit tool, that is the moment, right, to jump all over it, not 5 years from now where other development forces are already in play and people are sort of over it onto the next thing because it's working. So that's, you know, that's kind of where we think we go from here.
So we can certainly take advantage of the work that's being done and try and, as you say, jump on the bandwagon. Well, before we thank our panelists for coming, and thank you all for coming, I wanted to make sure that you were aware of, again, our work continuing in this area. If you leave us your business card, we'll be sure to add you to our mailing list. You'll get announcements of future events coming up, future report releases and the like, and we can sign you up for Talking Transit and keep you up to speed on a lot of the BRT work going on in Chicago. Also wanted to bring to your attention two other events MPC has on the near-term horizon. One is our annual luncheon, November 1st. Margot Georgiadis, CEO of the Americas for Google, will be speaking on planning and technology issues. It should be a fascinating event. And if you are so inclined, sponsorships for that are still available. And then another event we have, similar to the roundtable format here at lunch, we call it our Urban Think and Drink. It occurs in the evenings, 5 o'clock, here in the same space. December 10th, we have a woman, Candy Chang, speaking, who will be talking again about the nexus between arts and urban space activation. It's aptly named Urban Think and Drink because Goose Island is our sponsor, and you do get to have a little drink while you're thinking. So please check our website and join us for both of those events. Thanks to our panelists, and thanks to you for joining us today. We're adjourned.